Thank you, Christian and Perkins Coie. Thank you, EDCO, for sponsoring such a great event. We're always excited to be here. And especially thank you to the University of Oregon. This is going to be the kind thing I do. Even though I'm a professor at Oregon State, I want to say thank you to the University of Oregon for being one of the sponsors. See, I can be big about this. All right, the observant among you will note a stylistic difference between Jordan's slides and mine, which inspires me that I'm going to hire you to co-write a book with me, Shannon. The title is going to be Finance is from Venus and Sales is from Mars. Because in particular, Jordan, where'd you go? There he is. You didn't use any pictures of sharks. That's a spoiler alert. All right, let me make sure I got this. So I appreciate you bearing with me on this topic, because this is, the title of the talk today is going to be Fear and Greed, Motivating Early Prospects to Become Your Customers. This is a concept that I've used for the last 10, 15 years in running sales teams and doing a lot of the mentoring in sales that I do for the Sales Academy at OSU, but I've never built it out into a full talk. So today I'm kind of excited to test this out on you guys. Also, if any of you saw the pub talk I did, that was kind of the topic, so I didn't want to repeat the content, right? So here we go. Let's start by just asking a question, right? Sales and selling is a transaction, but I've got here pictures that are meant to imply sales, but what is this? What are each one of these? Whether you're selling or buying coffee, cars, or enterprise software. From one perspective, from the sales perspective, which is what I know from my career, of course, that's a sales transaction. But for the customer, of course, it's a purchase transaction. And given that I was a buyer, I was a procurement professional before I became sales, I think it's really important to start by thinking about the customer's perspective here and understand why people buy, and then make sure that your sales motion, whether a consumer-based sale or whether a business-to-business enterprise-based sale, matches that customer buying journey. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So why do we buy something new? Why, this whole idea of making a sale, deciding to purchase something, whether you're buying something for yourself or for your business, why do we buy something new? Well, first of all, the act of buying is in fact an action that requires some sort of a positive effort, right? And to prove that, just think about, well, what's the opposite of buying? Not buying. Just continuing to do what you're doing today. Or, if you're a consumer at a grocery store, you're going to just buy the same products that you always buy, and you're not going to buy something new. So that's kind of the starting point of just like, if you're going to do something new, if you're going to buy a new product or service, you have to take an action that you otherwise wouldn't be taking by just doing the same thing over and over again. Buying something new, again, requires this change in habit. But if you think about it, as humans, our human nature is mostly to be pretty comfortable with what we do on a daily basis. Generally, we prefer constancy, and we tend to resist change. Now, there are some among us, and maybe I'm one of these people that's kind of a change junkie and likes to do new things, but even in my own personal life, the products I buy for myself and my family, I'll typically find something and I'll continue to buy the same things like we all do. So if you're going to, as an entrepreneur, as a founder, introduce something new, you've got to overcome this tendency that I think we all have to a certain extent to keep doing what we're doing, right? If you're a business buyer making a choice to buy a new product for your business, we all know that one of the biggest criteria there is minimizing or even eliminating, avoiding entirely, this notion of risk. So it's even harder to sell, well, giving away my punchline. This is why selling new products and services is really difficult. Because you're knocking someone out of their normal behavior, and that's kind of all of our tendencies. So, from a sales perspective, there's this notion of discovery and qualification, which we're all taught to do in sales. And for the teams I've run, I always ask my sales teams to ask 3 questions every interaction they have with their customers, right? And just for those of you that aren't familiar with business-to-business sales, discovery or customer discovery is the process of understanding what's important to the customer. Do they have the problem that your product or service solves? Do they have a need, right? So that's the discovery, making sure that your product actually, that they have the need that your product or service fulfills. Qualification is the process of what matters to me, the salesperson, right? Are they likely to buy? Do they have budget? What's their timeline? Is there a compelling event? All these things that make my continued engagement with this prospective customer worth my time rather than moving on to another customer that's more qualified. So those are the 2 concepts, right? So in every sales interaction, I ask my team, first of all, before you ever talk about your own product or service, ask yourself, why would this prospective customer do anything different than what they're doing today, right? I'm asking them to look for their motivation for change. Because we just established that in order to buy something new that they've never bought before, we're asking them to change. So you got to figure out, do they have a motivation to change what they're doing today? And if they do, the next question is, why would they buy now? So maybe they have the need that your product or service addresses, but it's number 17 on their priority list. And we all know that at most we get to numbers 1, 2, and 3 every day, right? So if you've uncovered motivation for change, but you don't feel any urgency, basically you're acknowledging this is going to stay number 17 on their to-do list, and I've tested a couple of different ways to try and bump it up to the top 10 or even to the top 5, all right? So if it fails that test, as a salesperson, you should disqualify, but maybe put this prospective customer in what we call the nurture bucket, where you'll continue to market to them, continue to send information to them to try and somehow accentuate their motivation for change and raise their level of urgency, right? So you're not walking away from this prospective customer, but you are kind of putting them on a back burner because it's just not the most high value use of your time as a salesperson. Then the final question is really what everybody thinks of and what most mediocre salespeople start with, which is, why would they buy my product or service, right? That's what mediocre salespeople jump automatically to. They think that selling is about persuading someone to do something that they otherwise wouldn't do. And so you just start selling your product or service without ever assessing if your customer has the need and the urgency, right? This is a mistake that most of us make. So, motivation for change, if that's the most important thing, then fear and greed, all right? So again, I've been using this concept to try and explain this notion of, is someone motivated to change? And you guys are the first people that get to really test it out on in a full-on audience. So a lot of, this is a financial image, right? In fact, financial markets are well acquainted with the term fear and greed. There's actually a fear and greed index that CNN publishes as a gauge of market sentiment, right? And so there's a bunch of different components that go into that fear or greed index. The other day, it just happened to be sitting at a 61 on a scale of 100. So the market is viewing things more to the bull side than the bear side by 11 points, right? But what I want to do is apply this concept of fear and greed to a person's motivation to change. So here's how I'm going to define it. First, let's define the greed motivator. Greed in a business or in a purchasing decision sense is if I do something different, good things will happen to me. All right? If I change my behavior, if I don't keep buying the same products I'm buying today, if I don't keep kind of dealing with stuff the way I'm dealing with it now and try something new, there will be positive outcomes, positive business benefits to me, all right? That's what I call the greed motivator. So that's in a business or purchasing sense, these are examples of if I do something different, that what is the better outcome I'm looking for? Maybe I'll get, more, the benefits will be to my family, right? I'll purchase a new product at the grocery store that's actually going to be a better product for my family, and everyone's going to be happier. Maybe I'll be able to live a healthier lifestyle, right? Maybe I'll be able to spend more time with friends, or if the product is an outdoor-oriented product, like, of course, we're very familiar with here in Bend, it's going to be a better outdoor experience, right? But if I don't do what I've been doing, and if I buy a new product, I'm going to be better off in one of these different ways. Does this all make sense? Right? And so this is what if you're looking for the greed motivator when you're doing these customer discovery conversations with prospective customers, this is what you're looking for. And again, even if we're talking about a business to consumer model, right? The consumer, even if they're looking at the product that they always buy on the shampoo aisle shelf and the new product, the only reason they're going to go with the new, if they're motivated by greed, is that they're going to end up better off by buying something other than what they would normally buy, right? So that's the motivator. In a business sense, these are also ways to appeal to the greed motivator in a business-to-business sell, right? So typically, and I come from the world of enterprise software, typically we will be looking for motivations for our buyers to buy our software around more customers, right? Anyone recognize that picture? On top, right? Top food truck lot 2020 according to the source, packed with customers. Maybe it's a better customer experience that we believe our product can offer, and we're looking for confirmation that the person I'm talking to doesn't believe that their customer's experience is good today, and you know what, if they just change, if they buy my technology, they can deliver a better customer experience. Maybe it's about just a pure financial appeal, right? Buy my product or service, it'll either help you to increase your revenues, help you to reduce your costs further. There might even be personal benefits to a business buyer. This will be good for your career. If you're talking to someone who has aspirations of being an impact player, maybe they're early on in their career, looking for ways to make them a champion in their organization. These are all motivators that business buyers are affected by when they're considering buying new technology or adding new suppliers to their business. Okay? All make sense so far? All right, so that's greed. And it really all comes down to time or money, right? In a business context, I think in a personal context as well. But business buyers are motivated by, is this going to get me, it's going to save me more time? Am I going to get more money, either save money or earn more, right? Top line or bottom line. So that's the greed side. Now let's talk about fear. The fear method, which I tend to believe is a stronger motivation for change, but you have to use it carefully, is around, if I don't do anything different, bad things will happen. If I don't change, if I keep doing things the way I am today, if I don't listen to this salesperson, if I don't buy their product or service, the problems that I'm experiencing are just going to get worse. And bad things are going to happen to me by not changing behavior. So we've all heard the Greed is good, movie quote, right? Gordon Gekko. Well, guess what? Jordan, be careful. Fear is good too. So, fear is why we humans are still alive, right? I mean, fear in a survival sense is what keeps our species from getting attacked by sharks, right? it's literal, or anything else. It's about our survival. So it's a survival instinct. But there's an analog in the business world when you're talking about this whole motivation for change. And that is, and your job as a good salesperson is to help your prospective customer understand this, right? By doing effective customer discovery and reflecting back to them that the problems that they have acknowledged that they have, and your skill in having this conversation is to get them talking about those problems. The problems that they have, if left unaddressed, will get worse. Right? If I don't do anything, bad things will happen to me. What are those bad things? Here's where the skill in having this conversation makes you really effective. Right? Unhappy customers will become more unhappy if you don't do something different in your business. Employees will become unhappy, or their dissatisfaction will continue. Anybody recognize this? It kind of became a meme, but I think this was from June of 2021. There were a bunch of employees at a Burger King, I want to say it was in Illinois, that were all just like, take this job and shove it, right? They literally had the support of their manager, who was so upset about the situation, and upper management and the kind of the franchisee not listening to their concerns, that the manager and the employees put this sign on the stanyard out in front of them, right? And it's made the national news. You don't want to be that business owner, do you? Right? So if you, in a conversation, find out that you're talking to a restaurateur and he or she has acknowledged that maybe they're having some employee satisfaction problems and your company happens to address that, your skill and adeptness in bringing up this example as a way of amplifying their feared motivator for change, motivation for change, might be the difference between you moving forward in that sales cycle and not. But you got to know that you've tapped into fear as what will be their primary motivator. And if you're doing business-to-business sales, we all know that it's very much of a team sport, and you have a large number of decision makers. Some of them in the company may be motivated by fear, others may be motivated by greed. So you have to be able to assess for each individual person who's going to be either the decision maker or your champion or maybe your detractor, because all these different people play different roles in a sales cycle. But you have to actually customize your messaging to know what's going to motivate each one of them to support this need to change. If you don't buy my product, your division's going to continue to deliver subpar performance, and you've already shared with me that you're ambitious and that you're looking for that next promotion within your company. If these problems persist, it's a career-limiting move. It's the opposite of that happy person walking up that stair-step ladder of career success. Of course, the business argument of things that are now causing your revenue to flatline may actually worsen. Competitors may leapfrog you in technology. Whatever is the right combination of messages will lead to deteriorating financial performance, and here's the real fear factor, the risk of going out of business. Again, fear as a motivation for change in business is something you have to use carefully, right? Because it is a really strong emotion. It actually, there's some psychology or some science to it that says, when you're in a conversation and experiencing a fear moment, it triggers the same kind of fight or flight emotional cocktail in the cortex of your brain than if you were facing that shark or a saber-toothed tiger or something like that. So that kind of emotional response when you use fear can actually trigger the fight or flight reflex in your audience. And that, by the way, makes them remember that conversation, right? It's kind of a version of a near-death experience. You've just made them really realize this should be number 1 on their to-do list, not number 17, right? Because this, and potentially this, are bigger risks than they were aware of, okay? And if you succeed in doing that in the conversation, you've used fear very effectively as a motivation for change. Any questions, any comments on this? I'm sorry, say it again. It's a very delicate dance. And if you were to ask me, Todd, have you ever messed it up? I'd say, yes, I have. Right? Good question.
So are health and wellness decisions primarily motivated by fear in the customer space in your thinking?
Coincidentally, one of my clients is the number 3 mental wellness app worldwide. It's called Metatopia, after Calm and Headspace, right? Metatopia is number 3. And yes, sometimes it's the greed motivator of employees and people who are really, really focused on their need or their peers' need for wellness. If they had access to health and wellness apps, they'll be better off. But the fear motivator, corporate benefits people, look, you guys have a retention rate that's already bad and getting worse. And so that's one of the ways that you can use fear to say, hey, we have to do something, right? Our employees, we know EAP programs are not effective because they only treat symptoms. We can actually do something better on the fear side. Am I out of time?
Oh no, you can keep going. But
I think I got.
Are we moving? Oh, okay. So you're
No,
still in your
I just like to stop for questions. But the minute you give me the hook, I will get off the stage. I will do that. Thank you. If someone asks me a question, I will repeat it in the microphone. Practicing. Okay, so putting all this together, this is actually a slide from the entrepreneurship class that I teach over at OSU, because I want these future entrepreneurs to be conscious of what will their buyer's journey be. Whether it's a B2B or a B2C kind of a business that they're talking about. We do case study, and not a case study, but a business formation over the course of 10 weeks in the quarter, right? But they have to be able to, in the pitch competition, defend what is their go-to-market strategy. But the key is your sales process or your go-to-market process to be maximally effective actually has to match your customer's buying process. So they have to start by asking how their customers are initially aware of their need, and then aware of the fact that there's a product out there that might address the need or the challenge that the customer is experiencing. Then everybody does their research nowadays. The process of buying has changed. We all expect to do 80% of our research before we ever engage with a salesperson. So as your prospective customers move from awareness to now searching and actually validating different alternatives to solve the problem that suddenly I'm aware of, is your company positioned so that they will find you, and your company will be one of the companies that they move down on their customer journey with to the next stage. So, ultimately, research, then this purchase, this conversion process where a prospect decides they're going to select your product or service and becomes your customer, and then becomes your advocate so that they buy more and they recommend more people to also buy your product and become your customer. But the whole thing here is matching the sales process to where buyers are and giving them the information that they want at the time in their buying process that they need it. And if you're really good, accelerating that process. And if you're really, really good, laying traps for your competitors so that it's your competing solutions, it's the alternatives that get winnowed out while your solution keeps going as the customer keeps driving down their customer journey. All right? So, I'll end with this. Shannon will recognize this, right? How do you go about having the conversation, the effective conversation that draws out, is this prospective customer motivated to change and feeling urgency? Of all the different sales methodologies I've used over the 25 years of my career, this concept of the value-based sale and the value-based conversation is the single best, most powerful model for how to have an effective interaction with a prospective customer. And this applies whether we're talking about that interaction being an email, a 60-minute meeting, or a 9-month sales cycle, right? It starts with these light blue boxes up top where you're doing what most salespeople are advised to do but don't do well, right? God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth. We should use them in those proportions. So in the beginning, you are not talking about your product. You're asking the customer, tell me about your situation today, and tell me about the negative consequences that you're experiencing because of the way you're doing things today. Never mentioning your own product. And then, if you could describe where you want to be, what's your goal? What is it, the outcome that you'd like, and the positive business outcomes that would accrue to your business, to yourself personally, if you're able to achieve this desired future state, what would that look like? So what are you doing? You're getting your prospective customer to articulate in their own words whether they're experiencing challenges, whether those challenges are severe enough that they're motivated to change them, whether you can amplify that motivation to change by turning up the fear or turning up the greed a little bit, whether there's urgency, whether there's this notion of a compelling event. You're looking for all of those signs and drawing them out to your advantage in this conversation without ever talking about your product. And then after you spend some time, and again, this matters, this is my model, my framework, whether we're talking about an email, a 60-minute meeting, a 9-month sales cycle, but this is the flow, this is the structure of the interaction I want. Validate the problem, the negative consequences of that problem, get them to describe the solution, how much better their life would be, then say, all right, so let's talk about what are the required capabilities that you'd need to get from the situation you just described to the outcome you just said is important to you. Again, still in generic terms, not talking about my product or solution, but I am effectively leading the discussion because I'm setting traps, right? I'm highlighting, I'm emphasizing as a trusted advisor, not a pushy salesperson, but as a trusted advisor, how my company may have helped other companies, or my solution or product may have helped other people to make the same journey that you just confirmed they consider to be important. So you can talk in general terms about what are the things that are required, and oh, by the way, those will line up exactly with your competitive strengths relative to other solutions. And how are you going to measure this journey? How are you going to confirm that, in fact, you're making progress, you're getting to that future state? Well, and so at the end of this whole conversation, kind of the last transformation is, well, great. In the time we have remaining, let me share a little bit about how we do this, how we've helped companies go from a similar place to where you just described you are, to a similar outcome to where you want to be. And let me, along the way, share why our approach has been better, more effective than the other ways that you may have researched, or the other ways that you may be aware of that can get you from where you want to where you think you want to get to. And finally, don't take my word for it. Let me offer you proof points, customer success stories, proactive references, things like that. If you have that kind of a conversation, effectively, you'll have drawn out all of their motivations for change in the first part of the conversation, and you'll then be able to use those effectively to, again, not be some pushy salesperson trying to push their product or service on you, but you'll be a trusted advisor, someone who truly has taken the time to understand their situation, why it's a challenge. You've earned the right to tell them about how, as a trusted advisor, other companies have made, or other individuals have made this same transition. And by the end of the conversation, if you've done it really effectively, they will want to hear about your product or service. And that is the goal. So, with that, I thank you all for your time. We can have questions.
Thanks, Todd. Can you hear me? I always you have such a huge amount of knowledge to share with us. I love listening to you speak, and I want to compliment you on pointing out that listening is so important. So not only in the marketplace, but even just in how we are with each other. I think this is like a really huge thing that you're tapping into. So thank you for that. It is. I know. I've actually had people ask me, so what do you mean by active listening? And I'm like, use your ears. So anyhow, I want to ask a question about, this is just kind of general marketplace in terms of salespeople. I know you have a ton of experience here. What do you think, what's the percentage of people who are selling something they truly believe is the solution and is the kind of top of the line, whatever service, good, whatever it might be? What do you think, what are we looking at in terms of the landscape for our sales?
Well, you'll be happy to know that I think most salespeople believe in the product or service that they're selling, right? I also think that we're bad liars. We tend to wear our personalities on our sleeves. And I know for me personally, although I'm pretty good at having a tough conversation and when necessary, concealing my motives, I can't be passionate about something that I don't believe in. I think that that's common to most, right? Sales is an incredibly hard profession. It's an incredibly hard profession. And if your heart's not in it, first of all, you won't be successful. And second of all, you'll be just twice as miserable, right? So I do think that the percentage of people, rightly or wrongly, that truly believe in their product is pretty high, at least for most of the kinds of sales that I've been in. There's industries that have probably a lower percentage. But I tend to take people at more than face value there.
I love to hear that. Okay, so we have a menti.com question from our virtual audience. Is it possible, I love this question, is it possible for a prospect to show both fear and greed motivation? And if so, would you proceed? How would you proceed?
110%. Absolutely. And in fact, I think that's normal, right? Rarely are we, I'll call it, rather than calling it imbalanced, rarely are we so skewed to one side or the other. There are some people that are super, super risk averse in life, right? And there are some people that are super, super greed motivated in life. I believe most people, and especially in business to business sales, most people who are rational, which isn't every procurement officer I've ever met, right? But most people who are good business people recognize and have motivations for a healthy balance of the two. So the worst thing is if you can't find either. If someone's heavily motivated by greed, heavily motivated by fear, or heavily motivated by a combination, great, that's a good sign. But my point to my sales reps is, look, if you can't find either, then you're missing, there's no motivation for change. So if you're thinking that you can convince that person to buy by taking him or her out to nice dinners and by spending lots of time educating them on the market and solutions, you're wasting your time. So it's the absence of both fear and greed that is the trigger to disqualify and move on. And my bias, my other bias, and I've taught my teams this, is your bias should be to disqualify, right? Happy ears, needy salespeople are always trying to look for reasons, trying to convince themselves that this person will ultimately buy. I take exactly the opposite. I challenge buyers a lot to prove to me that they actually are interested, right? I have one of my little superpower things, I use this as an interview question, but my answer is, one of my superpowers is I will always walk away from every deal at least once. I believe you need to test your standing in the deal, to see whether your prospective customer pulls you back in or not. And if they do, you always have to know what you're going to ask for in return, whether it's leveling the playing field against a competitor who's got more access than you do, or whether it's access to power within the account or something like that. This whole concept of posturing or even actually walking away to see if they pull you back in, and if they do, knowing what you're going to ask for, I think is a super important technique in sales. And I don't use it as just to play games. I truly believe that that's how you find out if you're in this deal or not. And if you're not, then you should walk away.
That's great. The next question is a perfect next question. Actually, can we go back just one? Is there other motivations besides fear and greed?
If you want to get granular, yes. But the reason I've just settled on fear and greed is I can fit any particular motivation for change into one of those two, right? So yes, we can get super fine-grained about it, but I just think it comes down to either do something different and you'll be better off, or don't do something different and you'll be worse off. This is my way of simplifying it.
That's great. What kind of person, so we're going in a different direction, what kind of person makes a successful entrepreneur? What kind of person makes a successful entrepreneur?
I could be a smart aleck and say you have to take the class. It's BA 260 over at OSU Cascades. No, that's also a complex answer because I don't think there's one profile. I think there are attributes that make for successful entrepreneurs. But I don't think it's cookie cutter, right? Because I've met, actually up until like 2 years ago, I would not have called myself an entrepreneur, right? I'm a startup guy. I've worked in a lot of early stage startups, but I've never been the idea guy, the one that's gonna be founding the company, right? So I was always very content to not call myself an entrepreneur, although I think I share a lot of the characteristics, the willingness to take risks, the willingness to learn from failure, to actually fail and then learn from it. There's a lot of things that I think are characteristic of that. But yeah, until 2 years ago, I had never founded a company. But what was really cool, last week we had an exit, right? So yeah, now I can say I'm a successful entrepreneur and I didn't even know I was an entrepreneur, right? Thank you. Yeah, it was pretty cool. I mean, it's not life-changing FU money, as we say, but it's something, right? And actually, I care more about being able to say what I just said as a professor of entrepreneurship, right? So I think what I'm more interested in when I have these kinds of conversations with the students in my class is, look, everybody's got the ability to try. And there's a lot of perceptions of entrepreneurship as it's got to be a go big or go home kind of thing, and you got to just like live it 24/7, and that's kind of a very Silicon Valley perspective on entrepreneurship. There are so many entrepreneurs in this community here that started small businesses as side hustles, and I think that's as valid a model for entrepreneurship, and in fact one that's much more approachable. So that's the one that I try and point out to all my students, that you can start all sorts of businesses as a side hustle, and it will grow if you've got all the the product market fit and all the other things that we talk about in business school, or in real life actually. the most exciting part is when that business it starts to compete for your main day job. And you hit this point in your life where you realize this thing you've been doing as a side hustle actually has legs, and now you have a really cool decision to make, which is, are you ready to jump in? That's like super exciting. And so when I have guests come in and speak in my entrepreneurship class, that's the question I always like to ask, which is, did you start this as a side hustle or not? And when was the point where that side hustle started screaming at you that this needs to be your full-time avocation, right? So that's more the model of entrepreneurship. And I think when you frame it that way, anybody can be an entrepreneur, and you don't have to have these like highly pronounced characteristics, because it's a super low-risk way of doing something that maybe aligns with your passions. And all of a sudden, maybe someday it can become your main source of income. And then if it really takes off, it can be an engine of growth for the economy and a source of employment and an impact on others as well. And then it gets really exciting. But if you think that that's what you got to do from the beginning, that's kind of what makes a lot of people shy away from this. And I don't like to promote that, that myth.
I love that, Todd. It kind of reminds me on how I always tell people to go into a comedy with low expectations, right? Yeah, it's like important life advice. Do I have any live audience questions for Todd? Yes. Oh, that's a great question. So he's saying, like we all know sales is hard. How do you know in a startup when, in terms of receiving feedback, how do you know when it's time to give up on the sale or adjust your product, your service, your pitch, right? Great question.
So Jordan and I would give the same answer, which is it depends, right? There is no one answer, but it is a bunch of calculations, right? So the methodology that we teach, that is taught in entrepreneurship classes today, is called the lean startup, right? For those of you familiar with kind of the literature on it and stuff like that. I mean, I went to business school a long time ago. I may not look like it, but I'm old. And we learned a whole different form of entrepreneurship when I got my MBA, right? It was all about heavy business plans and spending months and months and months getting the business perfect and the product perfect and stuff like that. Totally different now, right? The new model is you go out and get customer feedback as quickly as possible, pre-MVP, right? And so if you're doing that, if you're getting early prospective customer feedback and it's telling you that you're onto something and you may need to pivot a little bit, you may need to pivot a significant amount, but there's still a there. If you're still getting that, and if your addressable market, all the market calculations continues to validate that it's a market worth going after, and if you believe your cost structure is such that, and your pricing structure is such that you can make a profit, then pivot. Don't cut bait, right? But you have to be realistic. And if you're getting not just signals, but shouts from early stage customers saying, you know what, no matter how much you believe in this, and how much you might have the problem that led to your product or solution, but I don't, talk to someone else, I don't, talk to someone else, I don't. If you keep getting that feedback, well, you do have to be realistic about it, right? Again, listening with the two ears. So that's my answer, which is the only thing that matters is customers or prospective customers. And if their voice, and you're looking for patterns, and if their voice back to you is validating that you got a thesis there, but with the little adjustments you need to make, then you should stay on it. But also beware of just going and tilting at windmills, because that's no fun either. And thank you for agreeing that sales is a really hard job, because it is.
Dress for action, listen with both your ears. Okay, write that down. Any other questions from the audience? Okay, I have another one from our virtual audience. Let's see here. How do you counsel entrepreneurs that operate out of fear? Oof, I feel exhausted hearing that, but I'm really curious to hear from you, Todd. What do you think?
So operating out of fear is different from looking for fear as a motivation in your buyer, first of all. So this asks me to be more of a organizational psychologist than a sales guy, but I'll never shy away from that. Entrepreneurs that operate out of let's call it a healthy paranoia, that's a good motivator, right? But we all know that can cross over into unhealthiness. And so entrepreneurs actually, you know what, I'm gonna change my answer on this. One of the things that I do think determines entrepreneurial success is an optimistic mindset. I don't think that you're as likely to be an entrepreneur if you're a pessimist, which to me means if you yourself operate out of fear, right? Because like sales, entrepreneurship is really hard, right? And by the way, when you're an entrepreneur, you're also in sales. So you've got the two hardest jobs in America, right? So if you know of an entrepreneur who is more motivated by fear, my conclusion is that person is likely, as a leader, to create a culture within his or her company that tends more towards the toxic side, that by itself will suppress their chances of success. So there is a quality that we just teased out for a good entrepreneur, right? You gotta look at the world as glass half full. You gotta see opportunities. And then, from that frame of reference, a healthy paranoia will keep you out of trouble.
I love that answer, and we've all been there. We've all seen it, right? What was your biggest challenge with founding your own company? Great question.
Getting customers. I'm not kidding, right? That was my job. It's hard. It's hard, right? I've probably given up too much information to then be discreet about how I would answer this. But I'm going to generalize by saying sales, right? First customers, really, really hard. And so a lot of product-focused entrepreneurs will say, oh God, the reason we're not getting customer traction is either the product's not ready, and I have to spend more time in kind of skunkworks mode, building the perfect product because we're not getting traction from our early stage customer discussions, or the sales guy sucks, right? Neither of those are correct. Well, they could be, right? The sales guy could actually be terrible, right? But I think more likely, a product-focused entrepreneur's intuition about it's all about the product is what gets in the way. The lean startup model says, go out and get prospective customers to pay for a pre-MVP product, right? To show you that there's actually a market there. And so I've worked with technical and product-oriented founders that don't recognize the importance of that customer journey slide, because their natural intuition is to stay stealth mode, not to establish thought leadership out in the market. All buyers today are doing their own research. And if you succeed in making them aware of the problem that you're going to solve, which is step one in the journey, they're going to go out and start researching. And if they research your space and they don't see anything on your website that's current, they don't see any blogs that are thought leadership blogs. And this, by the way, applies to consumer businesses as well as B2B stuff, right? The best consumer business founders are the ones out there blogging. So many of the entrepreneurs that I've met here in Bend, they publish blogs about their new health-oriented consumer product. They're publishing on LinkedIn, they're tweeting. They are relevant to the conversation. And so when their customers, consumers, not just business professionals, start researching, they find them. And that reinforces the customer's perspective that this is a relevant company, this is a relevant product that I want to do business with. But if you have an entrepreneur or a founder who is not comfortable stepping out and being a thought leader for the space and establishing himself or herself as someone to be reckoned with in this emerging space, even if our product is not ready yet, we should still be talking about the problem that we're going to solve. And that, if you're not doing that, that absolutely makes those first sales harder, a lot harder. And frankly, that's a battle that I've lost as an advisor because I haven't been able to help product-focused or technical-focused founding teams to recognize this. Yeah, it just makes sales harder. You can have the best salesperson in the world, cold calling, getting meetings, after the meeting, buying entities like, wow, this guy's had a great pitch. Let me go look at him. Let me go see what this space is all about. And if all they see is crickets, you're not going to get that follow-up meeting. All right?
Thank you. Yes, I have a question in the back.
Yeah, thanks for being here today. Kind of playing on what you were just talking about, pricing for like first customers, especially companies that are coming out of the gate, trying to get their first MVP out there. I've seen models of either way free, charging extreme premium, somewhere in between. What are your thoughts on pricing?
What are your thoughts on pricing structure for new companies just right out the gate?
I was going to do that. All right, I assume you're talking a business-to-business product. Okay. Well, first of all, have you heard there's a famous story of how really one of the first ERP software companies, Ask Man, Sandra Kurtzig was the founder of that, how she first priced her software offering, right? She had this whole conversation scripted, and they were going to pause at each significant part of the conversation until they hit no from the customer. So they're like, our price is going to be $100,000. Customer doesn't blink. Per module, customer still doesn't blink. Plus 22% support, customer doesn't blink. And then there's training on top of it. Oh, wait a minute, wait, training, we just can't do that, right? So that's how they figured out what the market will bear in a kind of a big ticket item sell. Now, is that relevant for our products? Maybe, maybe not, right? You have to test pricing. But of all the different pricing methodologies that we teach, and my students are going to get this tonight because tonight's the pricing lecture at 6 o'clock. I'm pointing to Kylie back there because she's one of my students. Value-based pricing, I believe, is the right way to price because it's aligned with the value-based conversation that we just had, okay? You can't go below cost plus. You got to know what your cost plus floor is. But value-based pricing is really all about establishing what is the value to the customer. What are their hard dollar savings? What are their kind of hard dollar expectations in increased revenue? What are their soft dollar savings in terms of employee efficiency and time and things like that? And then making your pricing come out to giving them at least a 3x return on the investment that they're spending. Ideally, you can get it closer to 10x. Certainly for your early customers, you're going to have to make it closer to 10x, right? If you can make a hard dollar savings or, revenue is a little bit harder, right? Because you really got to talk about profit. And so if it's a top line impact, then you got to be able to come up with some cost assumptions to make it bottom line profit. But if you're saying you can increase their profit by $1 million, they should be happy to spend $100,000 to save $1 million or to earn $1 million more in money, right? But it's those round numbers that are usually my guidepost. Anywhere between you want to get to 10x, they won't pay, especially for an unproven commodity, they won't go any lower than 3x. And that 3x has to be conservative and credible with them. And then when it comes to designing a price model, there's lots of considerations, right? What are your pricing metrics? What are your volume tier discounts? I tend to believe in being very transparent with pricing because that's one of my upfront qualifiers, right? I tend to use that rule of thumb, very early on in conversations to see if this prospective buyer sees the world I do. If they and we can agree on numbers that say they spend $100,000 and they can save $1 million, we ought to both agree that that's a pretty good deal. And if I'm not getting any love in that conversation, you know what? That's a sign that they're probably not going to end up as a customer. I don't know if that answers your question or not. Is that some guidance there? Thank you.